Hey, and welcome to a new episode of Wrestling with Memories. I am your host, Fash, and as ever, I'm joined by Wax, the Brain Hussein. How are you doing, Wax?
I'm doing very well, Fash. Very well. Excited to get on the road to WrestleMania after doing our Royal Rumble live show last week.
Yeah, I mean, 1992 is the year that both of us have been looking forward to. It's the year that we became all in wrestling fans. And I think the people that are our vintage really started watching wrestling in 1992 as well. It's a year that, when you speak to people, they're very fond of. And when you start off with what's there in the year and what it ends up being, there's so many changes as well, both, on screen and off, talking about this year. But, last week was interesting. We did our watch along, the first kind of listen only show. And it's nice to see a lot of people followed us to the podcasting platforms looking at the numbers. So it seems that people made the effort to watch the Royal Rumble along with us. So that was good. And now we're back into the usual format and talking about early 1992 and essentially the period after the Royal Rumble at which Ric Flair became the WWE champion. He's no longer the self-professed world champion now. He's dropped the tag team belt, which used to be the big gold belt, and he is the WWE champion. And there's some controversy as well with Sid and Hogan. So, it left things off in quite an interesting phase. And now, as you say, it's the march to WrestleMania 8.
Let's just recap the end of the Royal Rumble. They had the three men, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, and Sid Justice in the ring. Hulk is trying to go after Ric Flair, but Sid from behind sort of knocks him over the ropes. Hulk is furious and like
A sore loser.
Like a sore loser. He pulls Sid Justice out of the ring by his wrist. And that leaves Ric Flair as the last survivor and therefore the world champion, as you've mentioned. So that's where we're at, and that's where we're going to talk about the road up to WrestleMania with these guys.
Well, yeah, today's episode, we're going to cover the WWE or WWF title scene, what happened, and then there's lots of other interesting angles and storylines, which we'll cover in future episodes, but just focusing on, what the main event of WrestleMania would be. I guess going into this and even after it, we've spoken about Ric Flair coming in, the big match that the wrestling kind of smarks won. It's Ric Flair against Hulk Hogan. And you thought, okay, they've positioned this as WrestleMania. It will probably be Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. But then you had that bit with Sid. We weren't sure. So what they did was something interesting. And I've got to say, right, I'm a sucker for wrestling contract signings and cheesy press conferences. And this is the first one that I saw back in the day in 1992, a really cheesy press conference. So what they did was they got the top contenders together. They got the champion Ric Flair together, and Mean Gene Okerlund was the master of ceremonies, and of course our man Jack Tunney there to make the announcement of who would take on Ric Flair at WrestleMania 8. I still remember this watching, the clips back in the day. It's still very vivid, and it was great to revisit that.
Indeed, and something that stood out to me is Ric Flair's jumper. He's wearing like a golf sweater.
He's wearing like a jumper you'd wear.
Exactly, on the golf course. But I mean, the thing is with Ric Flair, you expect him to be styling and profiling and wearing a sharp suit, but he was anything but, which I just found really odd. He must have not got the message, or maybe it was a late change to what.
Yeah, it wasn't like you're right. It wasn't the kind of look you'd expect from him as the first kind of appearance as the champion. You would have thought it'd be like his old NWA days, kind of suited and booted with the
in
Rolex.
terms of the people that we had at the press conference. We had the Undertaker, Roddy Piper, Hulk Hogan, Sid Justice, and the Macho Man as the potential competitors, and we've got Jack Tunney there as well, the famous Jack Tunney that we talked so much about, announcing that one of these guys is going to be the challenger. And very quickly, he announces that.
Well, before you say that, I mean, there's some logic behind it. Before you jump the gun here, logic behind the guys, right? So obviously, Hogan and Taker were the last two champions. Sid was the last man in the Rumble. Matchman was actually in the last four. And Roddy Piper, I guess, he became the Intercontinental Champion on the night, and he had a feud going with Ric Flair. So I guess they were all connected, Lucy. But as you say, Jack Tunney's going to make the announcement. I love this for cheese, as I say, right? The way they did this and, the way he announces it and the reactions, they were brilliant. I don't know if you
Well,
want to take me through
as
that.
he's announcing who the challenger is going to be, just before he announces the name, Sid Justice gets up from his seat.
He's ready to get
Um,
up and look at his papers and make his speech, his big
yeah, he's
victory
ready.
speech.
Exactly, he's ready to say his speech, and Sonny comes out with the name of Hulk Hogan, as if it could be anybody other than Hogan. And exactly as Fash is demonstrating, Sid was furious, ripped up his papers, and sat back down with an evil look on his face. Hulk Hogan
He got
obviously
screwed, man. He got screwed.
he got screwed because naturally he was the
He should
last
have been the
person in the
contender.
Royal Rumble, so he should have been the contender at WrestleMania. But Jack Tunney screwed
Well,
Sid
it's always about
over.
Hulkamania, isn't it? It's all about Hulk Hogan. I like Macho Man's reaction and the reaction of Piper. Then Undertaker was just Undertaker.
Undertaker,
I
yeah,
just weird.
exactly.
It was just weird seeing Undertaker in that character sitting
Yeah,
in a press conference. So all it was brilliant. But as you say, they announce it as Hulk Hogan. He comes up, gets up, gives his usual kind of Hulkamania
yeah. And
speech
what
that
we
he always
see
does.
after the press conference, they do an interview with Sid, and this is when we do see his first heel like promo. And he's absolutely furious. He's seething. He assumes he was going to be the pick, and he blames Hulk Hogan for obviously what's happened.
He
Um,
uses the word bogus, doesn't he? He calls it
does
bogus.
doesn't he?
He says, "Is it because he's the new guy? Is it because he's not a movie star like Hulk Hogan?" So,
Yeah,
and you know what the interesting thing is, right? This whole thing, and we've discussed it in our watch along, so check out in the archives. But they position this as if Sid was in the wrong. But
yeah.
to anyone watching it, and if you watch it today, Hulk Hogan comes across as a total bitch in this, right? And he comes across as being in the wrong. Whereas
Even the way
Sid,
he's
yeah,
celebrating as if he's
exactly.
got
It's
really
so
lucky,
heelish.
and he's
Exactly. It's like so heelish, and Sid, everything he's saying is true,
yeah,
which makes it interesting. Because really he's not the bad guy, but he's been portrayed as that. So the way they did this was just weird. But right now, based on this angle, the understanding is that it's going to be Hulk Hogan against Ric Flair. I mean, one thing I wanted to mention just in that, because you watch a lot of old NWA, see the whole kind of press conference and Ric Flair's kind of little promo beforehand. It was very much like he was in the studio in
yeah.
one of those NWA tapings, wasn't it? That's what it reminded me of.
Yep, definitely. It was very similar to that. I mean, we've got a Saturday night main event coming up only, I think within a couple of weeks of this press conference. But in between that, when we get an interview from Sid, who actually apologizes for, his words and his anger at the press conference. And he's almost tracking back, and he's supporting that Hulk Hogan will be in the main event. And that obviously sets up the match then for Saturday night main event, where you've got Hulk Hogan and Sid Justice on one side against Undertaker and Ric Flair on the other. A very quick word about Saturday night main event, Fash. This was
Saturday nights
Saturday
main event
night's main
wax.
event.
Yeah.
This was an occasional one-off event that they would do on a Saturday night on a different network to their usual, and it would be this huge,
NBC.
yeah, it
Yeah.
would be this huge event for wrestling. And back in the day, in the Hulk Hogan Under the Giant day, they were doing huge astronomical,
Yeah.
something like 18, 19 million viewers,
Yeah, I think
which,
the match you're referring to
yeah,
was a huge rating, and
um,
it was because, as you say, it was syndicated television then, right? So you had Superstars Challenge. You didn't really get the big stars taking each other on. And NBC would have these Saturday nights main event specials, which did huge numbers, and they would have a theme. And the last one prior to this was in, I think, the summer of '91. But there's an interesting tidbit here as well. So this particular episode is actually the first one on Fox. So NBC had actually cancelled Saturday night's main event after that 91 special. So this is the first time Fox, which is obviously a huge network in the US today, but it was only about 5-6 years old then. So it's something new for them. The difference was that the NBC specials used to be about 90 minutes. This was only a 60-minute special. So there's a lot of changes here as well and something new. But as you say, a big main event. To get people interested, and actually an interesting card in general, because they had Randy Savage against Jake Roberts on there as well. They had Piper against the Mountie, and they were supposed to have the tag team title match on there, but there was a change there. So we'll discuss the other stuff in a
yeah.
future
So
episode.
the match
But it
that we're
was all about
focusing
this
on,
main event.
yeah, is the main event: Hogan, Sid versus Taker and Flair. And very unlike Hulk Hogan, he's taking a beat down in most of this match to Hulk Hogan, to Undertaker and Ric Flair. He's selling a lot. I mean, we see him in trouble, and he wants to tag out. Like a typical tag team match, we're waiting for the big tag to Sid, who's going to come in and clean house. But he goes for the tag, and Sid steps away. Um,
Well, let me see. Say, you're doing the disservice. I know you're hungry and you want your dinner, but you're doing a little bit of disservice to
Well,
this.
as usual, Fash is not aware that we are under a time limit, but
We are under a time
carry on,
limit, but
Fash.
you can't let down the fans here because you're missing some nuances, and we're all about the details, right? So I guess as you say, a lot of what you're saying is correct. But during the match, Sid is doing okay. He's kind of collaborating, but then I think at one point Hogan poses, and Sid just looks at him as if, what an absolute, you know what? And then there's a few other kind of things in the match where you just see Sid's getting annoyed, and then he's on the turnbuckle. He's kind of first kind of holding on to the rope and pretending he's going to tag. But the one man you forgot to mention here was Brutus the Barber Beefcake, because before the match, Hulk Hogan had said that he's going to bring a special surprise, which was your man coming out again, another hideous outfit that really had to be censored for people watching. But he's out there, so he's kind of saying to Sid as well, like, and Sid's kind of nonchalantly standing there at the apron, pretending he's going to tag. And then at one point, I think he even cups his ear and kind of mocks the crowd, and he's talking to the crowd. But as you say, eventually, Hulk needs some support. He's going for the tag, but then he kind of jumps down and he says something to Brutus Beefcake, threatens to punch his face in, and we know that's extremely dangerous for Brutus, and essentially decides to walk out on the match.
Yeah, and he walks out and he's got this crazy look on his face. He's like absolutely
the psycho look. The first time we see the psycho look,
and some great work from Sid, and his facial expressions were always something special. Crazily, Hulk Hogan still ends up fighting back with the help of Brutus, and I think the match ends in a disqualification win for him. But it's just interesting to me the way they've laid this out. They're obviously wanting Sid to be the heel, and they want the fans to believe that he's walked out on Hogan.
Yeah.
As if Hogan's not done anything at all to cause this little incident. But Sid is certainly playing his part. He's actually acting like a heel would as throughout this sort of match.
And I think that our understanding is he wanted to be a heel, didn't he? So you can see he really played it, and then sees the mannerisms, and then he cuts a promo afterwards as well with Sean Mooney, which is excellent. To be honest, if I went back to watch this, and he's playing the character to perfection.
Yeah, he is, and Hogan does one as well shortly afterwards, where he's dedicating the title match at WrestleMania to Brutus the Barber Beefcake, who helped him win this particular match, and Brutus is sucking up to Hulk Hogan as he normally does.
Let's say stuff like Hogan was in the bed next to him pumping.
Yeah, he just says some crazy stuff. He literally says, "I woke up and there was Hulk Hogan lying in the bed next to me," and
which is not. So essentially, what he probably was saying that Hogan gave him blood, but the way he said it, I think you have to go and watch this, guys. It's
it's very interesting.
I think even Hogan's face goes a bit.
It's like what?
Exactly. But yeah, at that point, but Hogan still thinks. I mean, the way they've left this is if it's still going to be Hulk Hogan against Ric Flair. But I think even as an 8-year-old, 7-year-old, I remember watching this because your cousins taped the Saturday night's main event. And you watched everything, and then I got a loan of it. And I still remember kind of watching it, even thinking, I think it's going to be Hogan and Sid now, isn't it? I was jacked up for that. That must be the match. But certainly on that evening, they left it as it's still going to be Hogan and Flair. But, it was a bit obvious that was not the case.
Absolutely. And then the next sort of point of note is the appearance of Sid on the Barbershop. The Barbershop we've talked about before, one of these segments, Parlor, Piper's Pit, where somebody will come on and do a promo, and Brutus is the host. So obviously there's a bit of tension between Brutus and Sid. Brutus calling out Sid as to why he's not, why he wasn't helping Hulk Hogan at Saturday night's main event. And this is where we get Sid turning proper brutish and heelish, and he comes out with that quality phrase, Fash. I don't know if you want to call it out.
I'll let you say it. I know you've been looking forward to seeing it.
A fat pig. Which is just tremendous, because you got to understand Hulk Hogan has not got the same physique as he had even a couple months back, because of he's taken off the steroids. He's not fat, but he's starting to sag a little.
Yeah, he says. I don't even think Sid put that much thought into it, to be honest. I think he just wanted to call Hogan a fat pig.
He didn't, and as part of this, he scares off Brutus basically without even touching him. I think he maybe grabbed hold of him at one point.
Man, the man's face will get
He's terrified of that.
Pieces,
yeah. So instead of smashing his face, and he smashes in the set of the Barbershop, which
It's
is again
iconic.
interesting. It's iconic and it's
Yeah.
psychotic as well. The way that he's behaving throughout this
But do you
period.
know the best bit of this whole smashing the barbershop is?
Go on, Fash.
When he's kind of done, he smashed all, he's got all the shaving cream on his face.
He's got the lot of white powder on his face,
Yeah,
and
no, it's a shaving cream. So it's like he's very crazy. So, and he's still acting crazy, but it's actually hilarious because he's talking away while he's got the shaving foam all over him. So that's something I think most people remember. And certainly, we've talked about the Rockers breakup on the barbershop. I think after that, this is the kind of memorable segment. And actually, this is it for the barbershop. It literally said puts out of business.
yeah, and the crowd was really into this at this point. The crowd are big pops for Brutus, and they were terrified that he was going to get hurt. And Sid was getting some real reactions from the crowd at this point.
Yeah, big chant for Hogan. I think now they turned it into what they wanted, and then the crowd. I mean, there might be some pipe noise again, but I think now we firmly knew that Sid's the heel, Hulk Hogan is obviously the good guy, and in between this, they had announced on one of the updates for WrestleMania that actually Hulk Hogan wanted to face Sid, and he won't take on Ric Flair. He wants to give up his title shot. So we had one half of what would be a double main event of Hulk Hogan versus Sid Justice.
Yep, and that leads us. I mean, we're still 5-6 weeks away, really, from WrestleMania at this point.
Yeah.
And the great thing about the run up is they would keep them separate throughout the period. They would try not to let them come on TV together. They wouldn't have any sort of promos together, and that really builds up the anticipation for a fight like this. And we get an introduction of Sid's new manager, a guy that has some uses, I suppose. Harvey Whippleman. Fash, what were your thoughts about Harvey Whippleman generally?
I was not a fan of Harvey Whippleman, but of course there's a backstory here as well, right? It was Sid that actually got Harvey his job. He was known as Downtown Bruno and was actually his friend. So Sid wanted him to be his manager. Harvey was managing big bully music. I've spoken a lot about, and the Warlord, but now he finally has a main eventer, and I guess it worked from a visual perspective. Harvey being quite small and scrawny and Sid being the big monster. But yeah, in terms of kind of, when we think of the greatest managers in history, you don't think of Harvey Whippleman. But as you say, in features, he played lots of different roles within WWE and was a real, great employee. And actually what you hear is a great human being as well.
Yeah, I mean, the week on week from this point on, you would see Harvey Whippleman come down the ring to do the announcement for Sid Justice. Sid would come in against some jobber or another, take him apart. And I was going to ask you, Fash, is this the first time you've seen the Power Slam?
The Power Slam or the Power Bomb?
Power Bomb, even.
The Power Bomb, yeah, definitely. I think Sid was the first guy to bring it to WWE, I think.
Yeah, this is the first time I seen it.
Yeah.
And I should think, wow, what a move, because nobody would take a wrestler up that high and land them.
No, people were just doing pile drivers and things, and there was slams, but this was the first time that we saw it. And yeah, the way he would deliver it was really, high impact, which really left an impression.
And he wasn't taking care of anybody; he was just slamming those guys.
Oh, that's the thing. And then obviously he'd put them on a stretcher, which was the added gimmick, and it worked because it was like, he's destroyed these.
Yeah, he'd put them on a stretcher. Let the staff come out and help the rest onto the stretcher. Then he would set them up, and then he would give them a clothesline or another,
knock them off the stretcher, exactly.
Which was just further heelish work. And he would do this week after week after week. And each show you would get this promo from Sid and you would get a promo from Hulk, sort of building up to their fight. And I've got to say, both guys did tremendous jobs with the promos. They were doing one each, pretty much, if not twice a week.
Yeah,
quite short, but the intensity that they were bringing to the promos was brilliant. Sid had changed his sort of motto from Sid is going to serve justice. Now he's going to rule the world, as
master and the ruler of the world. Yeah.
So I thought they did tremendous work.
I think on the camera. Yeah, I think and Hogan was always great at his promos, right? And I think Sid kept up his end of the bargain. And like you say, it was good in this period because they weren't in each other's faces. And this is, we're used to kind of, what happened years later when it was always the main eventers were always in each other's face. But you had that, they're separated, which, builds up anticipation. And as you say, Sid's going through people. Hogan's not doing anything really beside these promos. He's not really having any matches or anything. And of course, on that onslaught, there's one man that Sid absolutely destroys, and it's your man Virgil. Can't catch a break.
I have no idea what Virgil was actually doing out there. He was helping out.
He's helping out a jobber. He knew it was a future. He knew it was a future.
Sure, helping out one of his brothers. Indeed, so he was helping out the jobber on the stretcher when Sid decides he's going to take apart Virgil as well. And something I didn't know, he broke Virgil's nose.
Yeah, storyline,
Um,
they said they broke his nose, and I think
because he
that's
took the
when
turnbuckle off, and he smashed his face into the unprotected steel turnbuckle, broke his nose. Um, so quite again, Virgil is one of these guys, or he's not a main eventer, but he's quite liked by the fans. We know he's a good guy.
he was excellent fodder.
Yeah,
And his role kind of changed to when somebody would come in or you want to make impact, use Virgil as the scapegoat. And that, the case of Sid here, if you remember when Yokozuna debuted, he wipes out Virgil and Nails, who I can't wait to talk about down the line. He destroyed Virgil as well. So he was just from being the $1 million champion, he just became a guy who everyone could smash about. But as you said, he was still kind of popular with the audience, so it did garner sympathy for him. And this is the kind of build up to it, but there was one other bit, Wax, that you might want to comment on. As this is going on, and there's a story behind why it's Sid versus Hogan as well. Maybe we can elaborate on it in another episode in terms of why is this match happening. But as we're getting closer to it, they start throwing some words around. Maybe this is Hogan's last match, and they play up to this maybe being Hulk Hogan's retirement match to really add kind of further fuel to this match.
Yeah, to really hit the hammer on the head the week before WrestleMania, there's a sit-down interview with Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan is not in character almost. He's being that normal guy rather than that Hulkamaniac. And he references it as being his final test in the interview. Which naturally leads Vince McMahon to ask him, "Well, is this going to be your final match in the WWF?" And then Hulk goes on this really long answer where he doesn't actually answer the question, but he references his movies, his other businesses, and he's had all these big fights. And I was actually just thinking back at this point, he'd been in some tremendous main events at WrestleMania, so
Yeah.
We don't maybe give him the credit for having the amazing career that he did over
I
the
think,
80s
yeah,
and
I
early
think
90s.
everyone was Hogan was the man, and if there's no Hulk Hogan, I guess none of us are fans to a large degree to this. But yeah, I think this was the point where things were waiting, and we're not going into, but the reason he's potentially retiring is the steroid scandal because now the shine was totally coming off Hulk Hogan. But I thought this was a really good interview.
Yeah.
I know he goes off tangent a little bit, but it was like say real. Vince McMahon didn't overplay it.
And it's rare. It's rare that at that point you would see these type of real life interviews almost.
And I believed he was retiring at this point, and I'm sure you did as well. The fans did, so they sold it. I mean, as we say, years later, Hulk Hogan is still kicking around. So can you imagine if he actually would have retired in
Call that
1992?
I know,
But as you
crazy.
said, he doesn't say he's retiring, but he kind of alludes to, I'll see after the match. So the way they're hyping this up is, this is going to be Hulk Hogan's last match. And Sid's got something to say about that as well. So, it was interesting because, we're talking about the main event scene, but we're not talking about the WWF title. So we've got one half of a main event, which is Hulk Hogan and Sid. The other thing here, which was interesting, as they were hyping this up, at the beginning, you might remember me and Gene was talking about, there's going to be a guest referee for this match. And they see it for the first couple of weeks and then they just dropped the idea. I understand they were trying to get George Foreman at the time to be the ref. And then Lou Ferrigno potentially was going to be the original Hulk, was going to be the ref here because he was doing some stuff with the WBF. But as we know, there was no guest referee and that idea was kind of dropped. So certainly they had some other plans for this as well.
Yeah.
But that's the hype for this match, and we'll get into some other bits and bobs that were happening in this period, which is just full of stories and angles and lots of developments. But where does that leave our man, Nature Boy Ric Flair? We were thinking we're going to get big Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, the match of matches, champion versus champion. But Ric Flair doesn't have an opponent anymore because of this Sid Hogan situation.
No, so Ric's probably thinking, well, I'm going to be on a nice wee holiday, at WrestleMania, but we know that's not going to be the case. And as you mentioned, when Hulk Hogan was moved out, Macho Man was moved into the picture, and that's going to kick off a tremendous angle between the two.
So you love this. You love this storyline.
I mean, I love the storyline next to Jake and Macho Man. I thought this was the next best thing that I'd seen back in the day. So I want to talk about that separately.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the next episode.
And maybe we can at WrestleMania episode we can talk a little bit more about why it wasn't Hulk and Ric Flair. And there's many potential reasons for that.
Look, there's loads of talking points coming in the episodes after this one. I mean, it is the other angles going into this event. The Undertaker is going to have a very interesting storyline and match as well. There's things going on in the tag team scene. There's other talents emerging. There's just so much to talk about, as you say, behind the scenes and in terms of what we were watching as kids on screen. So, we've got lots to cover in the coming episodes. I think the next one, so we'll cover Randy and Rick and their very personal storyline. The Macho Man just can't catch a break. Everything with him ends up being very personal. But as you say, this is one of those iconic storylines as well that we'll cover in the coming days.
Indeed. So let's leave it there, Fash. Until next week, everybody, tune in again to Wrestling with Memories.
He's Wax, I'm Fash, and he just said, we are easy. He basically screwed up our goodbye. This is the problem with Wax, as I was saying before, the man's just thinking about his food because he's going to eat, he's fasting.
Well, we've got
fasting.
4 more fasts left, and
exactly.
we're on reserve energy at the moment.
Exactly. So he's just not on the ball today. So I apologize on behalf of my colleague. What he meant to say was, he's Wax, I'm Fash, and this is Wrestling with Memories. We'll catch you next time.